Brothers and sisters, we write stories with words on pages. God writes stories with grace in our lives. And we're going to dive into a story of amazing grace tonight with one of my dearest friends, Jimmy Wahlberg. Thanks so much for being with us, guys. Jimmy, dude, it is so good to have you with me tonight.
What's up, brother?
I just love being with you.
Oh, man, I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much.
No, there's people who, like, when they meet you, they're like, man, you Mark Wahlberg's brother? I can't wait to meet Mark and be like, dude, you're Jimmy Wahlberg's brother.
Yeah, that happens once in a while.
It's going to happen. We're going to set that up. We're going to note it. I'm just so stoked to be with you, man. And I love your, like, I'll try to get through listening to your conversion story without crying. Though that is gold for the show when the host cries. So whatever. I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for your response to the Lord and for you being here, man. But before we dive into your story, what's it like growing up in the Wahlberg family? That's not the average family. Well,
so when you say grow up, right? When I was growing up, we were a very average family, right? We were your typical Irish Catholic, 9 kids. Parents that worked seemingly 24 hours a day, lots of trouble, lots of drama.
I can tell by your accent, grew up in California.
Yeah, I'm a West Coast boy.
Yeah, no.
I'm from Dorchester, Massachusetts, the heart of Boston, really, a working class neighborhood, which is now kind of not so much a working class neighborhood anymore. People have been priced out. But we grew up in a neighborhood where, and in a time when neighbors looked out for each other. You knew your neighbors, and if you were acting up, your neighbors had permission to give you a slap on the back of the head. Or at the very least, they were calling your house.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But they had permission to take action. And that's obviously not the case anymore.
No. There's something beautiful about that.
Now, if you yell at somebody else's kids, they're calling the cops on you.
Oh, yeah, no, it's crazy.
Right?
And then the kids will complain to their parents if a teacher corrects them and,
No. Kids,
did irreparable psychological harm to their child.
Kids will call 911 on their own parents.
This is a different world.
Yeah, it is a different world.
So how does that, so you got an average family, like what happens to a family dynamic when multiple brothers become world famous? Like what is that like, and what does that do to your psyche as a kid?
So, well, first of all, this transition for them started to happen while I was in prison, right? So I'm locked up, and I'm starting to hear right at around the same time as my conversion, right? Right around the same time as I was approached by Father Jim Freitas in MCI Concord in Massachusetts, a maximum security state prison.
Wow.
Right around the same time, I was hearing from my family members that my brother Donnie was in a music group, right? And at that time, the name of the group, this was pre-Hangin' Tough.
Pre-Hangin' Tough.
They were doing like old R&B remakes, right?
Really?
And really like the name of the group was Non-Nuke. Remember Non-Nuke of the North? Right, it was like
I'm glad they changed it.
Yeah, so ain't we.
Yeah, no, that wouldn't have gone well.
They changed it when they came out with the song. When they started to do the song "New Kids on the Block," that's when they were like, "Wait a minute, hello."
Yeah.
But the priest. So let me just say this: the priest approached me at this prison, and I was sort of running this game, trying to create this illusion that I was rehabilitated, right? I was all better. So I was doing self-help groups, therapy, you name it, I was doing it. Right. And in a lot of cases, I wasn't just doing it, but I was sort of in charge of it, right? And so the priest approached me and he was like, hey, listen, I'm looking for a custodian in the chapel. Are you interested in this job? And I instantly thought, well, this is going to be good. This guy smoked cigarettes.
Right.
He had coffee, he had a phone, he had, just a quiet place. So I was thinking immediately how I was going to manipulate this guy, how I was going to take advantage of this poor priest, right?
This is your mental space.
That's the way I thought.
Prison. That's the way I thought. And that started before prison.
That is what
Obviously,
ended me up in prison.
That's what got you in prison.
Yeah. So that was my thought process.
We had a picture up on the screen a minute ago. Can we get the close up of that one real quick? Because this is you and your brothers, right? Let's zoom in on that middle face here.
Okay, so let me just say this.
That's not the guy sitting here right now, dude.
But that's That's after prison.
That's after prison.
That's after prison. That was taken at a party for the NBA All-Star game in Los Angeles in like 2004, I think, was the year that was there. And
brother, I gotta say, looking at your face right now.
Yeah.
Anyone in
I
Christ,
was smiling on the inside.
You were smiling. That's a big smile.
I was smiling
Jimmy,
on the inside there. I was really, and I actually really had a great night.
Thank God.
That night, because it was the first night in years that the three of us had really got to spend some quality time together and just laugh and smile together.
Wow. Okay, so there's that scripture. Anyone in Christ is a new creation. The old is gone.
Yeah.
And this is a process, obviously. You ended up in prison.
Yep.
I look at that face. I look at this face. Mm-hmm. I mean, there is an inner life and joy.
But I still have a long way to go, Chris, because there are days like I pray that God just puts a smile on my face. Just and this whole mask thing, right? Like I was just getting to that place where I was really engaging with people in the supermarket and smiling and and then they said, no, you can't do that anymore. I can't. So you had to cover that smile. And if you notice, even now, if you go to the airport and you have to wear a mask, right? And you make eye contact with somebody, right?
Yeah.
Where you normally might exchange a pleasantry or a smile or whatever.
Right.
You don't know what's happening behind that mask,
someone's smiling.
right? You have no idea.
Or if they're grimacing at you.
Right.
But dude, okay, but we jumped way ahead.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people don't know your story, and they need to.
Right.
Which, by the way, you got to buy the book, The Big Hustle. It's honestly, I'm not a big reader.
Right.
Okay, I've almost never in my life sat down and read a book from beginning to end. Just like get into this and just keep reading it. I actually did that with your book. So
thank you, brother.
Well done, man. It's beautiful. I just want to hear the whole story. Because again, if people they hear your last name.
Yeah.
And they jump straight to, hey, what's it like being a brother
sure.
to these guys? Which I would imagine at some phase, I mean, you're in a spiritually mature place right now. I'd imagine at some phase in your life, it's like, it's a little dehumanizing because I got my own thing, my own story. What's that story, dude? We jumped into you were in prison. What's the long journey from this guy growing up in South Boston?
Yeah, Dorchester.
Dorchester.
We would like to make the distinction.
Dorchester.
Two different.
Not with an R.
Two very different places, but just a bridge connecting us.
Yeah. So what landed you in prison, man? What happened?
So, I picked up drugs and alcohol at a very, very young age.
How old were you?
I had my first drink when I was probably 8 years old. It was the older kids in the neighborhood thought it'd be funny to watch the little kid drink. I drank, nothing really happened. There were no consequences.
Yeah.
What happened to me is that I felt my first little taste of acceptance and my first little taste of attention. No matter what kind of attention it was, I was starved for attention. I was lost in a house of 9 kids.
9 kids.
Yeah. And at
financially
that point,
struggling, parents never coming home from work.
Yeah. At that point, there were 9 kids. We were 9 kids living in a 3-bedroom apartment. Right? So we were foot to head, 2 to a bed. I always had somebody's feet in my face growing up. And
there's something a little beautiful about that, but also not.
There's beauty, but I also feel like there was a lot of just trying to survive. I think we were all just trying to survive, right? We were all trying to find our own way, our own place, our own attention. And, I think my parents were probably ill-equipped to have 9 children and to be able to attend to their needs. They attended to the needs that they prioritized the needs, right? Which are food and a roof, right? Those were the priorities, right? But as we know now, as parents, right, it's a lot more to the job.
Oh yeah,
right?
Man.
And our children need us to be their spiritual guides, right? To teach them right from wrong. It was me in my house. For us, it was more of a, my dad worked hard, he drank hard, and he came from a generation where there wasn't no hugging and no love and all that stuff. My mother did the best she could. My mother grew up starved for love and attention. She would tell you, that's why I had 9 kids, right? Because I was lost looking for love. So she knew sort of the experience that we had because we sort of repeated that, or at least I repeated that.
No, and a kid needs not just the food and someone taking them to school, but someone to look them in the eye and say, hey, I love you.
Yeah.
Which This is something funky too, like in the, kids who grew up in Generation X with boomer parents.
Yeah.
For a lot of them were like hardworking blue collar boomer parents. That wasn't the thing you did.
Right.
In fact, look, my own dad is like, I love you. It used to be a phrase, and he used to think of that like, okay, when I'm dying, you get to hear that. But like that's a human need.
I heard it once or twice.
Yeah.
I always smelled alcohol when I heard it, right? And I'll tell you, to jump ahead.
So you associate alcohol with this acceptance?
Sure. And in the closeness, right? And helping to take that wall down, right? To jump way ahead, my uncle, who was my father's older brother, he was the oldest in his family. He died just about a year ago, and he asked me recently, just a couple of years ago. He said, "I'd love to, get together with you and talk." So I said, "Yeah." Wow. I came. I flew up from Florida, and I took him out to lunch. And he said, I want to know more about my brother. I knew him as my brother, but I didn't really know him as a dad or, as, or any of those things, right?
Wow.
And they weren't, I remember as a young kid, my father had 9 children. My uncle had 9 children. We lived one town away from each other, but I don't ever remember spending very much time with them, right? We didn't really have much of a relationship, right? And he said to me, tell me about my brother. I want to know about my brother. And I said, I told him the first thing I said was, I said, I don't think I ever heard the words "I love you" unless I smelled alcohol. And he thought about that for a second, and he looked me right in the eye and he said, "Consider yourself lucky because we never heard it at all."
Wow.
And that was a big moment for me in my life, right?
Yeah.
For me to be able to look at my dad a different way, because I looked at him I was holding him responsible. I was blaming him for things that he wasn't equipped with. Nobody equipped him with these tools either, right?
Dude, that's a key part of like the conversion and healing experience.
Yeah.
Like my own dad loves me to death, and we say "I love you" now normally. But there's a place in adulthood, like I see people who resent their parents for their wounds. It's like, dude, your wounds are yours. Yeah. I tell my kids, you're going to go to counseling because of things I do to you.
Yeah. Well,
I'm trying my best, dude.
My father ended up living in my house, right? So in his later years, when I bought my first home, we built an in-law apartment. He came to live with me.
Wow.
And I did eventually hear all the things that I longed to hear my entire life. Another thing that sort of was an awakening for me was that I wanted to hear these things, but I wasn't, kids shouldn't have to earn love, right? They shouldn't have to earn affection. They shouldn't have to, but, as an adult, I earned his respect, right? He watched me raising my children. He watched me as a husband.
Your kids are
and as a
incredible,
provider,
by the way.
right? Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And so we ended up in a place that was really good and really healthy.
Praise God.
Right? And I was so grateful for that, to have
Praise
that
God.
time,
So let's journey back to where we started talking about you in prison.
Right.
I also had an experience of drinking. Probably first time I was drunk, I was 12 before I came to the Lord. It was like that was the thing I did for fun as a kid, and it was the same kind of thing. Like, hey, let's feed this little kid beers and watch what happens. It's fun to watch. Yeah, whatever. That didn't eventually land me in prison. What went wrong? I mean, how you described how there's months where you were not remembering what was happening. Mm-hmm. You had an experience with a cop that landed you in prison. Tell us about that.
So I mean, by the time I was 12, I finished the 7th grade, right? And I remember the school telling me, or in my parents, please, he shouldn't come back to this school next year, right? He's not going to be okay here, right? Wow. Because it was always drama. But that was actually my last official year of going to school. I completed the 7th grade, and I remember my last day of school was Friday. That night, Friday night, I was going out, right? And I was 12 years old. And I remember my father saying to me, don't forget now, when the street lights come on, you better be in this house. And I was out with my friends, and when we went out, it was like 5 o'clock, you go out, right? Because you got till 8 o'clock when the street lights come on. Right. And we were drinking, 12 years old, hanging in behind the schoolhouse. We were drinking, and I remember the street lights coming on. And I remember looking, and I remember thinking, I'm not gonna make it. Because I was unwilling to walk away from that what I was experiencing in that moment with my friends and their acceptance and drinking and, you know, like if I went home, I was going to miss out on something.
Yeah.
That was June 20th or something like that, beginning of summer. I didn't go home until August.
You just out in the streets
didn't go
drinking.
home. I essentially lived outside.
Wow.
I allowed, in that moment, I made that decision that night, I'm not going to make it home. And then after that, it's like, well, now I can't go home, right? Because he told me, if you ain't home by the time the streetlights come on, don't bother coming home, which was really was an empty threat, right? There was probably a punishment or a spanking involved, but I didn't come home. And I drank and drugged and carried on. And
was it drugs or robbery? What landed you in jail?
So it was always alcohol and drugs were behind everything. So it was either I was under the influence and I was acting up, or I was not under the influence and I was trying to get the money to be under the influence. So it was a constant state of my next drink and my next drug. But I went to prison, adult prison. I was committed to the Department of Youth Services. So I was in juvenile detention, in and out. I was in foster care. I was in homeless shelters, all that stuff.
I remember one time I asked, how long were you in prison? You're like, just the 80s.
It was the 80s.
It was
adult
the 80s.
Prison was the 80s. And so I got arrested for an armed robbery. And essentially what that amounted to was me and a couple of my buddies out, 2 o'clock in the morning, drunk out of our minds, and a guy walks by and we robbed him. We beat him up. We took whatever it was that he had. And the only thing he could remember the next day in the hospital, right, was we put him in the hospital, was my nickname, Jimbo. That's all he could remember, and that's all you needed to know in my neighborhood,
and
right?
That was it.
And then the cops showed up at my mother's house. I went
Jimbo.
to my mother's house, and my brother snuck me in, and I was showering and eating, and he was giving me some clean clothes, and the cops showed up at the door. And I left that day, and I didn't return for over 5 years. I went to prison.
And you came out for a little bit and then
went
back in?
So that 5 years, I was in maximum security state prison almost the entire time.
Were you in solitary?
I was in solitary for the last half of that sentence.
For 2 years you were in solitary?
Because what happens is, with someone like me that's starved for attention, you're in solitary confinement and you're looking for things to try to impress all these guys that are doing forever, right? And these are grown men. I'm a kid, right? And I'm trying to create this illusion that I'm some tough guy to them, right? Because
so it's the same fundamental one that drove you to drink in the first place. Gets you in solitary. It's like, someone loved me.
Yeah, and and the thing is that what I became aware of many years later was that their opinion of me was so much more important than my own opinion of me. I didn't really have an opinion of me, and if I did, it was a low opinion, right? I didn't think well of myself. I had no self-esteem, not a low self-esteem. And so I constantly lived for others, for their approval, and to try to impress them, for them to think a certain way about me. I was in maximum security state prison in Massachusetts, and I can remember like it was yesterday walking through the chow hall, right? And we're talking maximum, the most dangerous people in the country in some cases, right? Killers, rapists, murderers, you name it. And I can remember walking through this chow hall is what we called it, and at each table there's a different group of people, either by neighborhood, by their ethnicity, by the color of their skin, whatever it was very segregated. And at every table, I kind of knew somebody. And at every table, I would approach the table to say hi, and I would become more like them, right? My mannerisms would change.
I tell you, man.
The way I talk changed for their acceptance.
This is the devil's primary attack on us. It's an attack on identity. I think of Jesus being tempted in the desert, and if you're the Son of God, turn this stone into bread. I'm thinking like Jesus thinking you're gonna trick Jesus on that one, evil one. Give me a break. But he's got the same playbook, and it's not big, and he does it on everybody. It's like, who am I? I'm gonna look for my identity in all the different places. So then you're out of solitary. Which
I went out from solitary directly to the streets.
Like, talk about zero rehabilitation.
From maximum security state prison, from segregation to the streets.
Prison reform.
They approached my cell on Friday and said, "You're going home on Monday."
So then you're on the streets for 6 months and you're back.
But hold on, I tried to talk him out of it. I said, no. By my calculations, I have a couple more months left because I didn't have anywhere to go, Chris. I had no plan. And you know, what prison is really good at is creating all this fear, right? So you live every day in fear, right? And so I'm afraid to go out to the streets, right? Because I don't know what's out there. I know it's here. I know it's in prison. I've learned how to survive this world. Now I got to go out into that world, right?
And I know your mom showed up at parole hearings.
Yeah. Well, she wrote a letter. She wrote a letter to the parole board, but that was many years later. I got out. On Friday.
She'd tell them to keep you in prison, though, right?
Yeah, she went to court on a number of occasions and told the judge, lock him up.
Yeah, let's see the picture of Jimmy's mom. She just passed away this past year.
Yeah.
God bless that woman. There's tough love, man.
6 months. That picture's from the Boston Marathon.
I'm sorry for the loss, brother.
Yeah.
I'm sure she's praying for you.
We miss her, yeah.
So she showed up, got you to stay until the conversion happened. So let's jump to where we started, right? So you go in the streets for a little while after solitary, and it's no surprise you ended up back in prison.
Right.
I know you ended up in a cop's house drunk, not knowing it, and then.
Yeah, so I was drunk, wandering around a neighborhood, and it was 2:00 in the morning. I was checking car doors and house doors, and I come across a door that was open. It was an apartment. And I went in and I just there was nobody there, and I started collecting their belongings and putting them by the front door. And just as I was gonna walk out the door, I thought, I'll look in the fridge. And there was some beer in there. And I sat down and had a beer and kind of dozed off. And he came home on a coffee break and found me in his home.
And that didn't go well.
That didn't go well. That didn't go well. And him and his partner, you know, they gave me a little neighborhood justice.
Yeah.
And they beat me up pretty bad, and I ended up back in jail. And when I went to court, they were talking about giving me a life sentence because they consider that a home invasion, which carries a life sentence. And it was the police officer who actually spoke up on my behalf. He was like, a life sentence? He's like, look at the kid. Why don't you get him some help? He's a mess, right?
Praise God.
Because I was a mess.
There's some good heroism in these cops, man.
He was happy with the beating I got.
Yeah.
The neighborhood justice was enough for him.
And that's better than a life sentence, brother. So you're back in prison.
Yeah.
And dang, I wish we had 3 hours for the show. It's almost depressing. We got 7.5 minutes left. So you're back in prison, and a priest is trying to get you to help in the sacristy.
Yeah.
Like the sacristy where they prepare for mass and stuff like that. For a big event with who?
So I'm working now in the chapel. I got approached by the priest. He offers me this job. And I was probably working there a week or two, and he approached me. He says, we have a very special visitor coming. And I was like, really, Father, who's that? And he said, Mother Teresa is coming to this prison. And I was like, well, that's amazing, Father. Who's Mother Teresa?
Yeah.
Right? Because I had no idea. I probably didn't know who the president was at that time, right? Because I lived for my next drink and my next drug, and my brain was wet. And so that time between when he told me and when she came, I did a little investigation. And here I am. I'm in the presence of, in my estimation at that time, God's number one assistant, right? That's the way I looked at her. In fact, there was a certain point in the mass when she was on her knees with the sisters from her order, and I looked over, and I felt like I was looking at God. Like, that's how powerful.
This is the power of holiness, man. She didn't have to say anything.
This is before she said a word, I knew I was in the presence of holiness. And then it was her time to get up and speak.
Now, she during that mass, by the way, they wanted her to sit up by the dignitaries.
Yeah, she wasn't having it.
Where did she end up sitting?
She ended up on her knees for most of the time on the floor with all the inmates. She refused. The cardinal, they had it was in the gymnasium, up on the stage. You know, he had a big chair and his hat and the whole. You know, it was a lot of circumstance, right? It's a big deal. And they had a big chair for her, and she refused. She humbly.
All the hairs in my arm are standing up.
Humbly, it was my first experience with true humility. By the way, it really was.
But here's a guy who's like, he ends up where he is because he doesn't know who he is.
Yeah.
Here's the holiest person I ever saw saying, "I want to sit next to you."
Yeah.
That's not just like, wow, this is holy. That sounds a message of redemption. That's the whole gospel. That's what Jesus did.
Yeah.
He's like, I want to sit by you guys, covered in your dirt.
Yeah.
So go ahead, man. How did that impact you?
So
the
time comes for her to go up and to make her remarks. And so she goes up and she starts saying things that I've never heard in my life. In fact, there was a moment where I felt like it was just her and I, like she was just talking to me, you know? And she was saying things like, you are more than the crimes that you have committed to get here. You are more than your prison number. You are a child of God, and that Jesus Christ died for your sins, right? And I was like, what? He did what? For who? For me? And it just blew me away. And for the rest of the day, I was kind of in a fog. But the next day, I ran back to Father Freitas, and I said, Father, I need to know more about this Jesus that she's talking about.
Oh, man, this is like first century stuff, brother.
I need to hear more about that, right? And literally that day, he started to prepare me to make my confirmation, right? Because I hadn't made my confirmation. And so he started the preparations, and I got transferred to another prison. He passed me off to that priest. And then I got lesser security. They passed me off to that priest.
Man.
And then it came time. I was in a minimum security prison, and it was time for me to make my confirmation. And I remember calling my mother and saying, Mom, I'm going to make my confirmation. I'd really like you to come.
Wow.
And she had made a promise to herself that she would never visit me in prison again.
Because she couldn't handle it.
She couldn't handle it. And so she prayed on it for a couple of days, and then I called her, and she said, I'm going to come.
Wow.
And she came, and I want to tell you, Chris, from that day, every time I spent any time with my mother, even in her deepest dementia, in illness, in weakness, and in as close to the end as she could be, she always would come back to, Jimmy, do you remember that day? Do you remember the day when I knew you were different? Right? She could bring it back to that day.
Anyone in Christ is a new creation, man. It's a new face.
You know, there was this running joke in my
God.
family, right? And for anybody that ever watched Wahlburgers, it's this mom's favorite, right?
Yeah.
This whole thing, who's mom's favorite, right? And it's this ongoing thing. And
Clearly it's Jimmy.
And I want to tell you that my mother had a very special gift of making sure that each one of us knew that we were her favorite. But
that's hard. That's hard to do.
Not long before her time came. And I'm talking about my mother had real dementia. She had a moment of clarity. And she said to me, Jimmy, you are my favorite. And then she went beyond that and said, and here's why. And she started to talk about everything that I was able to overcome and all the changes that happened in my life and that I was, that I was a man of God now, right? And she was very clear. And in that moment, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I was her absolute favorite.
My condolences to Mark, Donnie, and Arthur. Jimmy's the favorite.
Yeah.
No, praise God, dude.
Yeah, man.
No, it's this. Seriously though, it's that story of redemption. It's like I could look at kids who had an easy time in life in my own family. Yeah, even already, I see certain kids who struggle interiorly. They have no idea. The ones who really struggle and put me through hell.
Yeah.
They have no idea. Like I'm watching a story of redemption unfold for that kid. And although I'm sorry, I'm crying. There's some kids who's like, it just kind of comes naturally, just be chill.
Yeah.
And some kids are struggling just to function in the family. Yeah. But the grace unfolding as they struggle just to hit a baseline normal is so beautiful.
I think sometimes it's even more than that. Like I look at my brother Donnie, for instance, right? So people were getting in trouble in my family.
They're going to cut us off in a minute.
Yeah,
go.
Getting in trouble all around my family. Somehow he had a gift to learn from others' mistakes. He would watch and he would say, I'm not going down that road, or I'm not going down that road. And I mean, listen, we all have our own journey. I had to go through everything that I had to go through to have this life that
brother,
I have.
I'm so grateful for the story of the Lord written in your life, and I just love you, man. Just
I love
thanks
you too,
for sharing
brother.
it, dude.
Thank you, man.
We're going to have you back to talk about how the Lord's transformed this into ministry, into blessing for other people. We'll see you on that next show, guys. Thank you so much for being with us.